A week ago I was driving home. My young daughter was in the car with me. I was in a hurry, so I decided to take a shortcut that led us down a lonely mountain road. All of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, the engine started to splutter, and the car ground to a halt. When I took out my cell phone, I realized I had no signal, of course. We were completely stranded, deep in the mountains. I had no idea how to fix the car, and it was growing dark. There was no gas station for miles, and the road was not used very often. It was clear that we would have to spend the night in the car and hope that some passing motorist would stop by and give us a ride. The sun was going down. It was beginning to get very, very cold. An eerie silence descended over the mountain, and all I could hear was the wind rustling through the trees. My daughter went to sleep in the passenger seat. I closed my eyes and was starting to drift off as well, and I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a voice. I couldn't make it out, but it sounded like gibberish. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as it got closer and closer, I opened my eyes and looked around.
Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu!
A dark figure was approaching the car. All I could see was a silhouette. It looked like a man, and he seemed to be dragging his foot.
Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu!
I looked down at my daughter. She was still asleep. I didn't want to wake her up. All of a sudden, the noise stopped. The eerie silence returned. Then I looked up and got a fright of my life. I had to stop myself from screaming out loud. Standing at the passenger window was the most hideous figure I've ever seen. It looked like a man, but his face was so twisted and contorted that it formed a frightening visage. He was horribly deformed. It was as if every piece of his skin on his face had been peeled off, and all that was left was bloody red muscle and sinew. He had no nose, he had no ears. His piercing eyes stared at me through the glass. I turned the key in the ignition again and again, tried to start the car, but it was no use. The engine just chugged, 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 and died. Outside the window, the hideous man took out a knife. He began chanting over and over and over to himself.
Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu!
Each time he said it, he stabbed the window with the knife, hitting it harder and harder each time. I kept trying to start the car. Tears were streaming down my face. I was desperate to get out of there.
Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu!
Suddenly, there was a loud crash, and the passenger window shattered. Broken glass showered all over my daughter. I screamed hysterically. The man's arm came through the window, and he brandished the knife, lashing out at me.
Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu!
Just then, I turned the key one last time, and the engine sprang to life. I floored the accelerator, and the car tore off out of there like a bat out of hell. I sped off down the narrow mountain road, leaving the hideous man far behind. I didn't know where we were going. I just kept driving and driving, never daring to look back. That's when I noticed my daughter hadn't moved. When I looked down at her, I could see she was muttering something to herself.
Tensu Metsu.
A chill ran down my spine. Her face was pale and she was trembling. I shook her, trying to wake her up, but when she opened her eyes, what I saw horrified me. Her eyes rolled in the back of her head. All I could see were the whites of her eyes. Her teeth were gritted together, and she was foaming at the mouth. Her face had changed. She didn't even look like my daughter anymore. She just kept growling over and over.
Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu! Tensu Metsu!
I kept driving, and finally I saw the city lights up ahead. We came to a church, and I pulled over to the side of the road. Scooping up my daughter in both arms, I carried her to the church and started screaming for help. An old priest appeared from the doorway and asked what was wrong. I told him about the thing I had encountered on the mountain road. He took one look at my daughter, and then he snatched her from my arms and laid her out on the church altar. As I watched, crying and shaking with fear, he took out some rosary beads and held the little wooden cross to my daughter's forehead. Then he started reciting prayers in Latin. The priest just let us stay for the night. He put my daughter in a spare bed and stayed up with her all night long, holding her hand, anointing her with holy water, and reciting prayers over her. He placed a Bible on her chest and a scapula around her neck. He told me my daughter was possessed by a demon, and he had to try to perform an exorcism. He said that if it wasn't done, and my daughter stayed like this for 49 days, she would never recover. She would be left insane. The priest instructed me to leave my daughter with him so he could perform the necessary rituals. He said if I stayed there was a good chance the demon would possess me as well. It had been a week since my daughter was possessed, and the priest is still taking care of her. I check on her every day. It's like she's not even my daughter anymore. She smirks and looks at me with such evil eyes. I just want my daughter back. If you ever find yourself on a lonely mountain road, whatever you do, don't stop.